Firstly, I just want to really thank the organisers of the 4th Social Wellbeing Conference for taking the chance and asking Dumbartung to be the keynote presenters, where many may have looked in another direction. Dumbartung, as Ian has said, has been on the landscape for 32 years, and we have worked in the front line in Aboriginal organisations in the communities in the southwest of Western Australia for 40 years. And the southwest of Australia, as we refer to, is like the deep south of America. A lot of tragedies have happened in the southwest that go unnoted by most of Australia because we're pocketed down into a place that not many instrumentalities of media nor cameras take note of the travesties that are committed against and the brutalisation that's committed against our people. When the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody some 30 years ago in this country was carried out, they had actually found that West Australia and Queensland were the states that had the 2 largest statistics of Aboriginal people who had died in custodial institutions. And you'll hear about that a little bit more in terms of our presentation here today. But I want to say also, last night here, I had an incredible experience of seeing some of my my sisters and Noongar's brothers that I haven't seen for a long, long time. And, you know, I was laying very sick in hospital one day, and this woman happened to come to my bedside, and, you know, there wasn't a grey hair on my head and there was one on hers, but she's up the back here today, and I want to just say how much of a pleasure and how it made my heart feel full of happiness to see you last night. It brought back some great memories. I want to talk now about a very important initiative of Dumbartung, and I want you to probably imagine more so than think. So let's go into our mind that's, you know, conditions our imagination, and try to visualise this important journey, because Dumbartung's journey is a story, and it's very sought after these days. But believe you me, in our early years, there were so many government attempts to assassinate and to be able to stop the voice of Dumbartung telling the truth. And I heard Ian say, and Liz, about the history and the understanding through the history. So firstly, we must know that there's 2 forms of history that depicts. There's the history of the victors, and that's the one that's in the cultural curriculums in this country. Then there's the history that's told by the vanquished. And that history is our black history, told by our people, telling our story, our way. And that history, the later history, is a history that we must ensure that our young people are privy to access, because that's the truth. The history of the victor is the deceitful lies in which the education curriculums have got our young people believing in what was best for them in the colonial process of this country. So I want you just to imagine something more so than to think about it at the moment. Some 32 years ago, I walked up an old staircase along a rickety veranda, quite dangerous. The floorboards were wooden, and it was an old orphanage run by the Catholic Church as Christian Brothers, and I was headed towards an interview, and the interview was for the director's position at an organisation called Dumbartung. And most Noongar people at that time said, Dumba what? I said, well, it's called Dumbartung. I said, oh, I don't know. And the person was Robert Riley who asked me. I said, oh, I don't know. Rob, somewhere out at a place called Clontarf. He said, well, where's that? I said, well, it's on Manning Road just across from Curtin University. He said, well, good luck. And I said, yeah, well, I need a job, so I need to go out to the interview. And I was interviewed by the whole committee, which was a bit daunting because as I walked into the room, as you would expect, maybe a 3 or 4 people interview, but the whole committee was in this old West Wing dormitory building. And in the dormitory, you could actually feel the darkness and the pain and the suffering of those young orphans. And it wasn't the best place to be. It just felt what we call warra, sick. And of course it was, because, as you know, the Royal Commission into institutionalised sexual abuse in this country that's just concluded that brought George Pell into conviction and jailed had made mention of Clontarf many, many times in its process, and had declared it as one of the more severe institutions of where the child sexual abuse and neglect happened to the orphans of Malta, Ireland and Europe. So we were stuck in the middle of this facility. I had the interview and I was told to just wait outside, in which I did. And rest in peace, a great Noongar man, Jeff Narkle, came out to see me after the interview. He said, Robert, we've interviewed a number of people, but look, there's quite a few people in here who think that you're not the right person for the job. They said, you're connected with the Black Action Group, you're more sensitive, if you like, in your mind to working on political issues, and we need to keep our culture separate from politics. And I thought, well, how are you going to do that? Anyway, I had to take that, and I remember then he said to me, I said, well, look, Jeff, that's okay, I'll go along. He said, no, hang on. He said, however, the majority have voted that you get the job. And I said, well, okay. I had an offer to study multimedia at Murdoch University with a full scholarship, and that was in one pocket. And I thought, yeah, that's something I'd like to do. I was sort of interested in, creativity in terms of multimedia. And I said to him, well, look, Jeff, I'm in a bit of a dilemma. So I pulled out this old brown paper bag, and it was a brown paper bag. And on the brown paper bag, I'd just come back from a 12-month cultural training program in Melbourne and Queensland. And there was this, amongst the mob there, it was, I think, Grant Nelson, his name is. Anyway, the fellow who does the football shows on NITV, he was one of them, and there was a few others. There was this little TI fella too, Bermuda socks, Bermuda shorts, and a button shirt, and he said, Robert, don't go causing any trouble, with the course. Don't go to DEET and make the issues. Let's just get through this, get our certificates and go. But he couldn't help continuously showing me into his briefcase all these papers that he had, how in the high courts of Australia he was going to fight for the native title for the islands in which he had come from. And I kept showing him this brown paper bag. And on the bag, of course, was the stage area, some marquees for artists, an area for our elders, Kids Corner, which was a major emphasis of linking our kids to their culture and customary cultural practice. There was a pictorial exhibition area. There were many areas, and centrally at the very centre of the festival, we had a burning tribute. And that tribute was a rock formation with a fire flame. And that was for all Aboriginal people who had died in custodial institutions across this country. So in opening the festival, the last words I spoke as I glimpsed that flame was, "May our campfires burn forever." And that has now become a maxim Australia-wide for our people. And the little fellow who had the Bermuda shorts and the socks, of course, was the great Eddie Mabo. So those years as they passed by became very important to me. As we built Kyana up as a corroboree, because we changed all the terminology from English to our culture. The city of Perth just didn't know what was happening. You know, they had given the go-ahead to what they thought was just a small gathering of Aboriginal people on the esplanade. And as was said again by Ian, over 25,000 people. And the second one in 93, 35,000 people attended from right across Australia. Huge bodies that existed in those years like NAHO, the National Aboriginal and Islander Health Organisation, had structured their national conferences to happen at the same time that Kyana was being run. So there were people from right across Australia. And if you can imagine in those years, and this is where I really need you to imagine, in Perth, it was so controversial to put one Aboriginal flag in the ground. You would have police there. Our colours, red, black and yellow, were bashed out of our young people. And, you know, they saw our flag as a threat because our flag represented land rights. Then they pacified the flag, obviously, as years went by, and now it flies everywhere, top of all of the government buildings and, you know, Parliament House and shires, but it never did at one time. Dumbartung put in 300 flags and banners up St George's Terrace and across the causeway. So then they started to realise they had a problem. Because for 200 years or thereabouts, of course, their policies were to separate Aboriginal people, to create the salt and pepper policies of, you know, dividing people. We had what we called the last balloon release. You'll see it in a video shortly. And when they released the balloons, they were bouncing off the side of skyscrapers where Wodgla people were in the offices doing their work, and all of a sudden red, black and yellow balloons were bouncing off all the skyscrapers. So the statement was huge. And Dumbartung's Kyana gatherings are the biggest gatherings culturally in this country's living memory. There has just not been gatherings of its nature that has been established since. I remember just before we get to the most important part of this beginning, as I went up the steps to open it, they then started to realise what was happening. So of course, the radio stations in Perth, particularly one called 6PR, who had an announcer called Howard Sattler, got onto the microphones and literally tried his best to tear Kyana down. He said it was a militant movement that had a radical nutter at its helm. And that was me, you know. As Jake the Musk says, I'm a lovable guy. But they tried their best to stop it. And they did. Our people did not have the empowerment within our community to ensure that a third Kyana, which by now, if we were able to run them every 2 years, I believe the political landscapes in Perth would have been so strong that our people would have unified a solidarity that we could have changed political platforms in this state. However, we just did not have the power or the wealth to ensure that we were able to keep those festivals going. So as I went up the steps to open this incredible gathering, all of a sudden there was a bunch of men, white men, at the bottom of the staircase. And all had suits on. And, oh, Mr. Eggington, I'm the Perth City council's litter control officer. You don't have anywhere near enough disposable bins or bins. You know, you need to stop now and get those in place. Another one was Mr. Eggington on the sound, pollution control officer. Your megabytes are way too high for the city centre. It's, just too loud. Next one was the city traffic parking officer. You can't have all the cars up here, and on and on and on. So there was an absolute government attack on Aboriginal people being able to take just 1 square half kilometre and set up our right as Noongar people to practice our cultural, customary law and culture on our own budja, our own ground, and in 1991 that was under extreme attack. A great poet named Graham Dixon, rest in peace, who wrote 2 incredible books. One was titled Holocaust Island and Holocaust Island Revisited. And as you could imagine, Holocaust Island refers to Wanjamup. Most people know it as Rottnest Island, a travesty, a concentration camp of war that's connected to a place called the Roundhouse, which were the first 2 buildings ever erected on the WA coastline. And Western Australia, unlike the eastern states, was actually navigated and claimed for the British Empire by naval vessels, vessels of war. So Graham Dixon asked me if he could write a poem just about what he saw about Kyana, what he felt. And, he was an underground writer, so again, he was never going to be accepted into mainstream because of his controversial poetry, and he'd write about the stolen generations. He was a member of the stolen generations, and he asked me if he could write about a poem that and how he saw Kyana. And of course I said, of course, Graham, I'd be honoured if you were to write a poem about Kyana. So he wrote a poem called Kyana, and that 30 years later has been turned into an incredible hip-hop song. And you'll understand how Dumbartung uses hip-hop, which is a young people's medium in which they're very strongly connected to be able to allow a transition back to greater depositories of culture like Dumbartung and Graham's writings and the support for their social well-being, and through the setting up of a recording studio is an aspiration of Dumbartung. So this song is in memory of Graham Dixon and performed by the great Flewnt Eggington and the great beat master Scotty Optimus Griffiths.
Go back, Noongar people, to the values of before. Gain strength from your culture, the spiritual dreaming war. Seek shelter from the vulture of colonial oppressors' law. From the presence of Jagan's spirit, as Noongars unite once more.
Check. We listen to the stories as the elders again explain how your culture flourished before the Europeans came. Find why it's important, your strength must never wane. For Noongars need the spiritual like dry land needs rain. See contemporary traditional come together on stage. Guitars weeping, drummers dumping in anguish rage. Hurt, fear, frustration, escape the poet's cage while haunted digits echo deep from a forgotten age. Observe the women dancing, weaving a singing song. History's mysteries from whence your soul belongs. Forget urban landscapes, go back to where you were strong. Search for hidden answers from which your spirit longs. Hear it be back before performance cause vast crowds to sway. Soulful mesme lyrics put broken hearts on display. But words of hope and freedom offered a brand new day. As daylight kisses darkness, children laugh, dance, and Kaya Kyana means to survive. Kaya Kyana, from which Noongar strive. Kaya Kyana, our culture on display. Kaya Kyana, celebrating indigenous way. Kaya Kyana means to survive. Kaya Kyana, from which Noongar strive. Kaya Kyana, our culture on display. Kaya Kyana, celebrating indigenous way. Yeah, we bang through the worst, still we soldier on. Still the culture strong, peace to my brothers, still holding on, hold it on. Stay staunch when you're told you're wrong. Pretty mad if you roll along. We need more love for all of the brothers up in the forefront, showing us how we should ball up. It's all love, if you want more cuz then see the peeps. We speak in peace, but we need release, believe in me. I seen the streets, but I know there's a better way for my brothers now. Keeping family bond strong and my cousins round, cuz I'm proud that you a family man. You done a lot more than your family can, and that's the kind of stuff that will warm my heart. Noongar showing strength for unity when we're torn apart. All we need to really do is form a start. Knowledge is without fall apart. I saw the spark. Kaya Kyana, a means to survive.
I want to get you to clap your hands out, alright guys? You know what's out, come on.
Kaya Kyana, our culture on display. Kaya Kyana, celebrating indigenous way.
Kaya Kyana,
a means to survive.
Turn it up, sound man, come on.
For which Noongar strive.
Kaya Kyana, that's better.
Culture on display.
Kaya Kyana,
celebrating indigenous way.
To the Noongs down south, straight holding it down, making a man proud when he kick it with crowd. To the Yamachis up north, they my brothers of course, keeping the culture strong and collect from the source. To the one guys out mid, straight living up off the grid. I ain't been there in a minute, but I'll visit with kids. And to the Koreans out east, my brothers, you straight beats. It's time for us to speak, so come and sing it with me. Ayy,
Kaya Kyana,
means to survive.
Kaya Kyana,
for which Noongar strive.
Kaya Kyana,
our culture on display.
Kaya Kyana,
celebrating indigenous way.
Kaya Kyana,
means to survive.
Kaya Kyana,
for which Noongar strive.
Kaya Kyana,
culture on display.
Kaya Kyana,
celebrating indigenous way. Yeah, may our campfires burn forever.
We're talking about, 32 years ago in a place called Perth. That, as I said, that was no easy feat for a small organisation of 2 people and a working party that gave some support in, being able to establish and pull off a gathering of where Archie Roach for the first time performed Louis Johnson, about a young boy who was killed in Scarborough by supremacist thugs, the Ku Klux Klan, took his life. The ambulance drivers pulled up and basically kicked him and said, "Oh, he's just a drunken young Aboriginal bloke, he'll be right, we'll go." He died there on the spot through the brutality of the West Australian ambulances. I just want to call up Scott and Josh so you can give them a proper acknowledgement, a proper blackfella acknowledgement.
So part of working in community with hip-hop, as we understand as professional hip-hop artists, is its engagement. The first thing I noticed volunteering when I was touring the country and was lucky enough to sign to a record label and have lots of experiences travelling, is how engaged young people were out in community by just setting up turntables or a microphone. So that was the first thing, is the fact that it has an immediate engagement. And then for facilitators, it gives us an opportunity to have a conversation about self-expression. So hip-hop for us is firstly about self-expression in a contemporary form. And that's what we're looking at now, is how can we make sure that our young people are able to express themselves in a meaningful way. And it might not come out through a conversation, it might not come out through talking with a counsellor or talking with elders. And we understand that hip-hop has about 6 times the amount of information than any other song on the earth. So it explores topics in deep and meaningful ways. And through the work we're doing in prisons and in community, we've been able to kick a lot of goals. One of the programs discovered was really successful has been working in prisons, and that's using what they call beat therapy, which is helping regulate. We know that childhood trauma is a huge precursor to a lot of young fellas going through the prison system and also acting out in many ways. And through beat production with hip hop, you can actually regulate. So this is through sub-bass tones and the repetition of a beat. I'm working with a colleague in the States, so he works with Latino and African American youth, and their situation mirrors exactly what we've got in Australia, exactly. So we've discovered that not only the rhyming, which is narrative therapy, but the beats. So it's a two-prong attack and can be hugely impactful. In 3 years of running a prison class, we were able to reduce the recidivism rate amongst those individuals by 50%, the best in the country in a prison. And that's a huge...
I think another really important thing about the hip-hop and what we're trying to do alongside Uncle and at Dumbartung and Scotty as well, our brother, is that we want to bring in the young fellas through hip-hop so that they can come and see places like Dumbartung and other organisations that are like that, that have that true strength and power and knowledge of our culture. And there's just so many things. If you look at hip-hop and how we can help and strengthen our people, I just really cannot see how it can go wrong, you know. It's what all us young fellas find and listen to when we're sad. We find our way back to hip-hop or music or some like art forms like that there. And that's the art form that a lot of us young Noongar mob are choosing these days. And I just think that if it's more accepted and if we try to drive that more, then I think it's only going to benefit all of us so much more.
Well said. Just like to finally add, part of this plan with Dumbartung of building a recording studio is so that we can get more young people to Dumbartung. And we know that we have a challenge on our hands going forward on how do we engage. And quite obviously, by building a recording studio and having facilities there, we will bring many young people into that space. And then being in that space, we know that it's not just about recording or writing rhymes. It is the good work that Rob and Selena have done for so many years that can see the fruit to the next generation. And that's what this is about. It's connecting to every generation and carrying that on for the next 100 years. So thank you for listening to us, and I'll pass you back to Rob. Thank you.
You do have us for a little while longer, so we'll get through this. But I just want to say that, yep, those comments make my heart feel warm and my resilience stronger, because I do know that both Scott and Josh have got an incredible connection with our young people, and we have to keep that connection real. We have to keep that connection purposeful. And most importantly, we've got to keep our young people interested in staying true to their old people's way of culture. Not this type of culture that many of our young people are exposed to today, that it's industrialised by government, that they take from our culture what they want to promote. And of course, a lot of the proper customary cultural practice is not part of that process of policy or funded as being so. So, you know, what Josh and people like Josh and Scotty is doing, it's real. And I think it's helping those of our people most underprivileged in terms of, you know, being in prison and coming from broken families and trauma and pain that so often lead to incarceration and so often should lead to mental health services, but don't. They end up here in jail. So I just want to say that the Dumbartung Aboriginal Corporation is as much about the other world as it is about this one. We believe we are guided in much of what we do by those of our children gone far too young and gone too soon. One of the hardest things in the southwest for our young children to do is just to keep alive. Our organisation has been through many challenging times during its 32-year history. It has been forced to maintain our services from an old Catholic church dormitory. The rooms and the buildings are in excess of 100 years old and barely habitable. We suffered major funding cutbacks to operating on a voluntary capacity to the brink of nearly closing down many times. During our journey, which has now become a sought-after story of endurance and survival, during these years we have been indignified by being talked down to by many racist, enraged, hypocritical bureaucrats until they got the confrontational conflict that they obviously wanted. Bound to the great tree of shadows, known to the orphans as the tree of death, as it grew stronger, many young orphans took their lives from its branches. It was planted during the orphanage's opening ceremony, and I've spent nearly half of my life in its shadows. It is our pleasure to be here with you today to share a glimpse into the story of our survival as a small organisation for in excess of 32 years, surviving against insurmountable odds and political challenges. Acted funny, but I don't know why. Excuse me while I kiss the sky. The great black genius, Jimi Hendrix. In the cave laid a chained slave outside some stranger digging his grave. He signals the warriors to the yonga with the kangaroo strapped over their shoulder as the fire maker prepares the kill. The great storyteller, the Buddhist stands grounded in reality, written by my 13-year-old grandson. This one is for you, Bobo. Rest in peace, and know that on our stolen and forsaken grounds, we were prisoners from when we were born. When we talk about whom we are and our history, we need to ensure that the black is within the core of the subject matter and not on the peripheral fringes. That's where we need to place whiteness. I would like to give a tribute to the following: for those harmless, innocent and peaceful souls who have been dragged into dark, damp prisons, for those who have had their children stolen away, for those of us who are living in the hell and the despair of severe addiction, caught in the freeze and suffering the insanity of ice, for those in the despair of mental illness, to those of our young who are about to fly into the bliss from a reality of standing alone, unable to escape the irresistible restlessness that you are about to release. Look into the darkness towards the glittering campfires of our old people and know that we love you, and the weapons we made for you are strong for your journey. To those of our very young who are about to have their innocence shattered at the hands of monsters, may our campfires burn for you forever. We must look after the children from the impoverished and the oppressed. Blessed is the man who has daughter warriors. I am doubly blessed. My daughters were born onto the ground of Dumbartung, strong with cultural identity and spirituality. Whilst our communities plunge into darkness and chaos, there are many who know the ravishing of when your heart is torn and broken, bleeding and never-ending yearning that hurts from the suffering of pain that you must rise above, that others will never know of. Those of our people who suffer together have stronger connections than those who have never felt the pain of loss as your heart dies. That much more. When the words are heard, stay strong. Its echo unheard ricochets back. I don't need your pity. And what the hell do you know? For it's only those who truly understand until it happens to you, you don't know how it feels. Jungameenya Bomiga, the smell of the white man is killing us, was the statement made by Yagan's mother as she witnessed the darkness of death fall all around our old people as they inhaled the introduced viruses. The open killing fields where the blood of our great warriors soaked into our sacred land that was created by our spiritual being, the Wargle, provided the necessity of life, the namaholes of fresh water, where our women would have from the beginning of time taken the water to refresh and hydrate the bodies of their babies, without ever fearing the trust of the spiritual creation, of the access to this very need of life. As this water entered their mouths and began to burn into their intestines, respiratory failure and brain death came before they could even leave the sacred waterhole. Australia has a black history was defined in a statement that was promoted during NAIDOC Week in the 1980s. As well, this year's theme, truth-telling, both are significant statements that focus on the issue of the truth and the voice of who tells the colonial history of Australia. It is imperative that our young people and our future generations are able to access the knowledge of history through a black lens. Our people must have a human right to tell our story our way. This is a global academic crisis that the victor's deceitful truths are the vanquished subjugated lies. The history wars are a very real threat to the future generations of a clear understanding and knowing of how this country was forcibly occupied by the British Empire. The realism and the truth has an incredible impact on the social well-being of our people. It enables the truth to allow a freedom of how this country is interpreted and gives evidence to the circumstance that transition from traditional to contemporary times and how that has affected and changed our old people's cultural ways, which were directly interrelated to the land through customary cultural practice. This was the political difference between land rights and native title, which now pacifies our minds to accepting policies and decisions that enforce our relationship with our land on economic interests. This then makes our spiritual relationship with our land become like a stranger. The shameful degrees of incarceration of Aboriginal people into penal systems and lockups across this country are a continued warfare against our people. The massive pandemics of suicide, the increased domestic violence, the addiction war against drugs, the institutionalised racism that is embedded in every government department's policy structures are a continued warfare against our people. The exploitation and the political corruption of the finances of the Prime Minister and Cabinet's IAS closing the gap initiatives being hijacked and capitalised on by non-Aboriginal interest groups is a continued warfare against our people. Our ochre is applied to give us the strength to fight the spiritual warfare that now rages through the minds of our young people that run like rivers of blood as genocide spreads like fire again. Leadership in our community today is more formal, elite, academic and government appointed, leading to positions in government's institutions and NGOs. It is an absurdity to believe that the very system that destroyed our people's way of life will be the same system that will heal what they destroyed. Aboriginal affairs is an industry, buying our people out, selling their human rights, capitalising on our own colonisation, speaking with two tongues, whilst candles of reconciliation glow and burn on the sides of our so-called leaders as they sit comfortably next to racist prime ministers who tell lies and hold their faces straight whilst they deceive as they negotiate in a no-winning place, the very chamber of genocide, that someone has got our people fooled whilst they talk about reconciliation and the attempt to enforce our human rights into a lie that they call the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Australia. I don't believe in statistics, psychology, or the deciphering of the unthinkable. I don't believe in research, reviews, royal commissions, institutions, politics, or I don't believe in religious hypocrites. I don't believe in treaties, as globally they have all been broken and twisted whilst they wrestle us into submission. I don't believe in the statement from the heart or reconciliation nor sorry. I don't believe in the concepts of Indigenous history and culture being subject to museum displays, as museums are to people like zoos are to animals, whilst our real warriors know that they were born to die in war. As our young people are rushed night after night to emergency rooms in the inner city hospitals as juveniles, the hospitals, I believe, should have a legal responsibility and duty of care to advise every parent of when a juvenile is admitted for any purpose of mental health problems. However, the reality is when the morning comes, the young people are discharged only to return to the source of the sickness for the street drugs to ward off the pain of withdrawal. There is never a defined intervention where parents are consulted and a plan of treatment is offered. This I have heard directly from many, many Aboriginal families and parents who have lost their children to drug-related death. And this was certainly the experience of our own family. As these ambulances speed into the Royal Perth Hospital rooms, they pass World Square, which is a park in the shadows of the hospital. Across from the Red Cross, adjacent to the Department of Aboriginal Affairs, the West Australian Department of Health, the Department of Communities, the Mental Health Commissioner's Office, across the road from the Next Step Alcohol and Drug Program, the Richmond Wellbeing Homeless Hostel, whose role it is to provide a safe space for those who are suffering mental health or at the risk of experiencing homelessness. Around the ablution blocks and the inner city doorways of these very agencies, the traditional remote Aboriginal people who have been sent to Perth for dialysis sleep in the freezing cold of winter, barefoot and at times shirtless, wandering lost in a city that barely recognises their need of social well-being. Left to the predators of the night and its harsh conditions, such as rain and wind, they are very, very sick people that need immediate evacuation from the fringes that they are caught in, not a kilometre down the road from this very conference being held here at the Parmelia Hilton. Let's together as a conference maybe move a motion that we write to the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, Ken Wyatt, and the Minister for the Health Departments, that they act immediately to help those people that are locked in to that human tragedy. To get those photos the other night, I entered into World Square. I've worked in parks right across this city from the time I was 23 years old, when I saw the old Noongar mobs sitting in Beaufort Park, and some of the dignity that people like old Sam Skinny Ugle and Ethel Eads and Johnny Garlett, some of the great artists like Gary Woods and Ralph Woods, Malcolm Ellis, There was a sense still of dignity. I got out of the car and I was reeled backwards by the smell of toluene, the paint stripper, and then I looked on the ground of all the fortified wine and my heart bled that here today we were to deliver a paper on social well-being, and these people are but a kilometre from where we sit. Let us not turn away any longer. They are literally dying in these shadows. A contender from the Perth Shire Council's local elections last year stated in the Western Australia paper, "I will clean up the mess in World Square." He was from South Africa. This he used as an attempt to gather the local votes of the people from the Perth electorate to become a councillor. The strongest medicine for our young people is proper customary cultural practice. The intergenerational passing of sacred cultural and spiritual knowledge. It's the only way to create the strength of resilience to the massive challenges that face our young. We need to unite our solidarity around the power of fire that will eventually light the darkness for our people to merge into where the spiritual world of our ancestors will cleanse the assimilative poisons of the white man's world, so we can again become strong as one, believing that it is us and only us that can heal the ruptures of our broken spiritual dreams and laws, and connect with the ways of our old people's beliefs and stay true to what we were born to be. It's a cultural crime that the government industrialises our culture through policies of economic benefit, forging the spirituality of an ancient, now contemporary cultural expression to what they want from it. A passive, non-offensive experience, profiting from turning traditional dance into auditorium theatrics or entertainment, whilst our great spiritual stories go under the world's auction houses and sold at the hammer's loudest bid. White Australia has become accustomed to the government's cultural industry policies. They have subjugated through commercial transformation the prostitution of our cultural belief systems, whilst our spirituality is drained of all seriousness, degraded of all vigour. It has been turned into mere gimmickry. It is being turned into tourism ornamentary, or a way of flaunting their imaginary racial unity by paying off our people to welcome them to country, when they know that they are most unwelcomed. This allows them to become so sure that they are no longer invaders, but guests on this land. So they take the welcome to country to heart. It mollifies them and leaves their moral rectitude unchallenged. You cannot separate our culture from the political policies of the history of this country. The day will come that we will take the sacred stone again. Perth, like all other major capital cities in Australia, has churches of all Christian faiths. There are several large mosques for the Muslims of the Islamic faith. There are many Buddhist temples, Baha'i temples, and there are massive community centres for the Italian, the Dutch, the Vietnamese and the African people. It is an indictment that there is absolutely not a single facility or building that Aboriginal people can call their own. When the first bayonets carved into ripping the bodies of our old people apart and the fire of the muskets dropped our warriors to the blood of the ground, I wonder if they thought about the Australian Constitution. When the water holes were poisoned and our women were raped and brutalised, I wonder if they thought about the Australian Constitution. When the Native Welfare Act allowed the empowerment of legislation to forcibly remove our children from the loving breasts and the arms of their mothers against the might of their fathers, I wonder if they thought about the Australian Constitution. As the Government of Australia announced a Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody, I wonder if the families thought about the Australian Constitution. As we now suffer the highest incarceration, suicide, domestic violence issues, mental health problems, drug-induced psychosis, after we have been dispossessed from our land, religion, our families, our ancient laws, torn apart from our emotional capacities of love, compassion, as ingrained trauma from the stolen generations pass through our lives, tearing our families apart. Why is it that many of our people are now thinking about the documents of the law of this nation and are pursuing to be included into the Australian Constitution? This we must ask. Is this what our future generations would really want us to pursue? To become inclusive into the very documents of the laws of the forced occupation. The stolen generations equate to human trafficking. The kidnapping and the forced labour for flour, sugar and tea equates to slavery. The Australian government should be taken to the international courts for war crimes committed against our people from across every nation in this country. From Dumbartung's newly voiced narration titled Massacre Grounds, I recite the opening and the closing verse of tribute. The shadow of the Union Jack falls over the land at dawn, as the bayonets are drawn and slashed into the backs and across the skulls, lacerating the bodies of babies just born. Our women and children were hit the hardest at the hand of Governor Sterling, as our great warriors hear the last screams of their daughters, as the sun glittered from his medals of war, sparkling from the barrel of a gun, as blood poured into shallow sand on the riverbank of Pinjarra in 1894. I give the following recognition to the great warriors: Yagan, the Wajak warrior; Jundamurra, the Bunabu warrior; Pamaway, the Bidjigal warrior; Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, the Lakota warriors; Geronimo, the Apache warrior; Shaka, the Zulu warrior; Atahualpa, the Inca warrior; Montezuma, the Aztec warrior; Hongihika, the Maori warrior. And for all those warriors and their descendants, may our campfires burn forever.